Policy templates were created to provide an abstract representation of policies that identify the constraints, state information, and operations that are used by the policy. The development of policy templates was initiated by the Practical Policy Working Group of the Research Data Alliance. This international collaboration surveyed more than 40 data centers to identify the three highest priority tasks that should be automated using policy-based data management systems. Collectively, 24 different tasks were selected by at least one data center. From this list, the top 11 tasks were extracted and representative policy templates were defined. The results were published through the Research Data Alliance in the paper Outcomes Policy Templates Practical Policy Working Group. The templates were used to generate policies at multiple institutions for EUDAT replication and distribution data grid, for the DataNet Federation Consortium, for the Platform for Experimental Collaborative Ethnography, PETCHI, at the Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute. 11 tasks that are candidates for policy automation were selected by the Practical Policy Working Group. These tasks are extract contextual metadata from each submitted file, manage data access controls for groups of users, back up the data sets, enforce controls on the data format or transform to the desired format, enforce data retention periods on collections, manage disposition of files that have exceeded their retention period, ensure integrity, manage checksums and replication, notify administrators when significant events occur, support restricted searching of the collections, generate storage cost reports, and track use agreements for access to collections. Policies for each task area were implemented by multiple projects and published through the Research Data Alliance in the paper Implementations Practical Policy Working Group. A standard structure was proposed for a policy template. The components were generalized to enable application across all of the data centers. In practice, policies had to define constraints, which specified the collection, files, and users affected by a policy, constraint information, which defined the information needed to evaluate the constraint, operations that are applied if the constraint is passed, operation information needed to apply the operations. A given policy might need to apply multiple constraints, multiple operations, and use multiple types of information. For the lifetime library, the information that is used in a policy comes from the persistent state information stored in the metadata catalog, from session variables that track who is accessing the system, and from input variables provided with the policy. A policy template is shown here. The template uses the extraction of contextual metadata as an example task area. Note that multiple types of contextual metadata may be needed: provenance, description, structural, representation, administration, and event information. For each type, a different constraint may be applied to restrict application of the policy to files, collections, users, or storage systems. Depending upon the constraint, a different set of state information will be needed. For example, a constraint on a file requires specification of the file name. The operations that are applied include metadata extraction, registration, verification of the values, verification of the attribute name, and setting of access controls. For each operation, multiple persistent state information attributes may need to be read or updated. An example is verification of a metadata attribute name through comparison with reserved vocabulary words and ontologies registered in the Helping Interdisciplinary Vocabulary Engineering (HIVE) service. The analyses produced by the Practical Policy Working Group were extended by the DataNet Federation Consortium. In addition to tasks for data centers, tasks were examined for data sharing, digital libraries, preservation, managing protected data, and implementing NSF data management plans. A total of 97 tasks were identified. For each task, multiple policies were defined. A total of 175 policies were created. For each policy, a policy template was created for an IRODS rule. The template defined whether a constraint was applied and the persistent state information that was needed for the constraint, the information needed to implement the operation used by the policy. The information categories included rule input variables, session variables, and persistent state information variable names. The operations that were applied by the policy. The operations included both the policy functions that were invoked and the microservices that were executed. A summary of the information that was required and the operations that were applied provides a useful characterization of policy-based data management. A total of 5 session variables were referenced, 50 persistent state attributes were used, and 123 operations were applied. The information is available in the book Policy Templates Workbook. Take 7 minutes to complete exercise 25. Create a policy template for a policy used in the NSF Data Management Plan. Use the template format from the RDA Practical Policy Working Group. Map a data management plan policy from the policy template workbook to the RDA Practical Policy template format. Please load a paragraph describing what you did into the lifetime library in the subcollection class INLS 624 by the end of today's class. Homework assignment number 4 is due at noon on Monday of next week. Define policy templates for 5 NSF data management plan tasks. Which components of the policy templates are common across the 5 tasks you selected? Note that the common components could be persistent state information, or operations, or policy functions. Our resource is Chapter 7 of the Policy Templates Workbook.